Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place where your thoughts can loosen their grip, and curiosity becomes something soft enough to rest beside. Tonight, our journey drifts toward a question that feels familiar to nearly everyone, yet strangely difficult to hold still for very long. It is the question of yesterday, not the loud, obvious yesterday of headlines and calendars, but the small, private yesterday made of moments that almost happened. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. If you can, lower the lights just a little. Perhaps there's a gentle hum in the room, or the distant sound of traffic that fades in and out like a slow tide. If you enjoy these quiet wanderings, you're welcome to like or subscribe, but only if it feels natural. And if you feel inclined, you can leave a comment later, sharing where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Each of us, after all, is listening from a slightly different corner of the same unfolding moment. Now, imagine something very small. A phone call you almost made, a message you typed then erased, a street you nearly turned down but didn't. These moments rarely feel important at the time. They pass like a breath you don't quite notice. Yet later, sometimes much later, they return with a strange weight. What if I had called? What if I had gone that way instead? What if I had said the other thing? We often think of the past as something sealed shut, like a door that closed with a definite click. Once closed, it stays closed. But our experience of the past does not behave that way. It drifts, it softens, it changes shape as we remember it, tell it, and live onward from it. And that brings us to tonight's gentle question. Not whether we can travel back in time, not whether we can undo great events, but something quieter and more intimate. Could the present, in some subtle way, gently lean back toward the past, like a whisper against yesterday's door? This is not a story about changing history books or erasing consequences. The universe, as far as we can tell, does not rewind like a film. There is no cosmic editor cutting and pasting scenes. Instead, what we will explore is an idea much softer than that. The idea that reality may be woven from probabilities rather than certainties, and that meaning itself may not fully settle until the whole pattern is visible. Think of it like this. When you look back at your life, you're not seeing a fixed photograph. You're looking at a story that keeps being re-edited. The facts remain the same, but the emphasis shifts. The background becomes foreground. What once seemed trivial takes on weight, while something that felt overwhelming at the time fades into context. This does not mean the past physically changes, but it does mean that the past you live with is never quite finished. Modern physics, surprisingly, offers a language that echoes this feeling. At the smaller scales we know how to describe, the universe does not deal in solid, definite outcomes right away. It deals in possibilities, many of them, possibilities that coexist quietly, like faint trails across a foggy field, until something causes one trail to stand out more clearly than the others. When physicists speak of probability, they do not mean guesswork in the casual sense. They mean that nature itself seems to hold multiple potential outcomes at once, only settling into a specific result when events unfold and information is compared. This can sound abstract, but it mirrors something deeply human. We also live among possibilities, especially before a choice becomes visible as a consequence. Now, here is where we must place a gentle boundary, like a soft fence you barely notice until you lean against it. Nothing in this exploration will claim that you can command the past or send instructions backward through time. There are strong rules in the universe that prevent information from being sent to yesterday in any useful, controllable way. Those rules are not limitations meant to frustrate us. They are protections that keep cause and effect from collapsing into confusion. And yet, within those protections, there is room for wonder, There is room to ask whether the way we stand in the present influences how the past fits into the larger pattern. Not by changing what happened, but by shaping which threads matter most, which probabilities feel amplified, and which stories come forward to guide our next step. You may already recognize this sensation. It often appears as déjà vu, the eerie feeling that you've been here before, even when you know you haven't, or as synchronicity, when unrelated events line up in a way that feels meaningful, as if the universe briefly nodded in your direction, or as a lucky break that arrives just after you decide, quietly, to try once more instead of giving up. Tonight, we will not rush to explain these experiences away, nor will we declare them proof of anything mystical. Instead, we will place them gently on the table and look at them through the lens of modern physics, psychology, and careful imagination. We will ask what it would mean if the universe does not simply march forward in rigid steps, but instead settles into coherence gradually, like ripples smoothing out across a lake. As we continue, you may notice your own memories drifting up. That is perfectly fine. Let them float. You do not need to hold on to them or analyze them. This journey is not about fixing the past. It is about understanding our relationship with it, and perhaps about discovering that the present moment carries more quiet influence than we usually allow ourselves to feel. So take a slow breath. If your mind begins to wander, let it wander. We're in no hurry. The story will keep unfolding, softly, like a path that reveals itself only a few steps at a time. When people hear the phrase butterfly effect, they often imagine something dramatic. A butterfly flaps its wings on one side of the world, and weeks later a storm gathers on the other. It is a powerful image, but it is also a loud one. Tonight, we will set that image down gently and look for something much quieter. Because the moments that shape our lives most often do not arrive with wings or thunder. They arrive as pauses, as hesitations, as tiny shifts of attention so small they barely register at the time. A glance that lingers half a second longer, a decision to wait instead of act. A sentence softened or sharpened by just one word. These are not the kinds of moments that feel important while they are happening. They do not announce themselves. And yet when we look back, they sometimes seem to glow faintly, as if they were always carrying more weight than we realized. To understand why these moments feel so strange in hindsight, it helps to imagine life not as a single road, but as a landscape covered in countless faint paths. Most of them are barely visible. They overlap, fade, and reappear. Each micro decision you make, where to place your attention, whether to speak or remain silent, how long to linger, presses one path slightly deeper into the ground while leaving others softer behind. This is what we might call probability weather. Not a fixed forecast, not a storm you can point to, but a shifting field of likelihoods. Some paths become easier to walk simply because you stepped on them once before. Others grow over, not erased, but less travelled. In everyday life, we already accept this without much thought. When you practice a skill, it becomes easier. When you avoid something repeatedly, it becomes harder to approach. These are not dramatic transformations, they are accumulations, tiny nudges repeated over time that quietly shape the terrain. What physics adds to this picture is the suggestion that uncertainty is not just a feature of our minds, but a feature of the universe itself. At very small scales, nature does not seem to decide everything at once. Instead, it allows multiple possibilities to exist side by side, like overlapping transparencies, until events and interactions gradually narrow them. This does not mean the universe is confused. It means the universe is patient. When we talk about micro decisions through this lens, we're not claiming that every thought sends a ripple backward through time. That would be too loud, too forceful, and as far as we can tell, not how reality behaves. Instead, we're exploring something gentler, the idea that the present moment participates in selecting which parts of the past become relevant, influential, and alive in our ongoing story. Think about déjà vu for a moment. That quiet, unsettling feeling that you have been here before. It rarely comes with clear details. It is more like an echo without a source, a sense of familiarity without a memory to attach it to. One way to understand this is purely psychological, as the brain misfiring or recognizing a pattern too quickly. That explanation may be enough. But there is also room to see déjà vu as a moment when multiple internal narratives briefly overlap, when different almosts brush against each other in your awareness. The same can be said for synchronicities, those moments when unrelated events align in a way that feels meaningful. You think of someone and they call. You encounter the same idea in different places on the same day. These experiences do not require hidden forces or secret messages from the universe. They can arise naturally when you look back and notice patterns after the fact, especially when your attention has already been tuned to certain themes. What makes them feel powerful is timing. The alignment appears just when you're ready to notice it, and that readiness matters. This brings us back to the idea of gentle nudges. A nudge is not a push. It does not force an outcome, it simply changes the odds slightly. Like tilting a table just enough that a marble prefers one direction over another. In human terms, this might look like being more open to opportunity after deciding to try again, or noticing connections once you allow yourself to believe they might exist. From the outside, nothing miraculous has happened, but from the inside, the world feels different. The same events pass by, yet they land in new places. It is important to pause here and remind ourselves of the boundary we set earlier. None of this suggests that you can correct past mistakes by wishing harder, or that the universe keeps score of your intentions like a ledger. The past, in its physical facts, remains unchanged. What shifts is the role those facts play in shaping what comes next. Imagine reading a book for the second time. The words on the page are identical, but the experience is not. You notice different details. You understand motivations more clearly. Scenes that once felt minor now seem essential. The story has not changed, but you have. And because you have changed, the story you carry forward has changed as well. In this sense, the present moment is always quietly collaborating with the past, not rewriting it, but reweighing it, deciding which threads to pull forward, which to set gently aside, and which to see in a new light altogether. As this idea settles in, you may notice a subtle easing. If the forces shaping your life are not only loud decisions and dramatic turns, but also countless small adjustments, then the pressure to get everything right begins to soften. You're not steering a rigid machine. You're walking through weather, and weather by its nature is responsive. It shifts, it clears, it gathers, not because it is commanded to, but because conditions change. As we continue, we'll slowly bring in the physical experiments that inspired these metaphors, not to overwhelm, but to show that this gentle view of reality is not invented for comfort alone, to echo something real, something tested, something quietly strange at the heart of the universe. For now, let this thought rest with you. The smallest moments may matter not because they are powerful, but because they are numerous, and in a world built from probabilities, numbers add up. There is a gentle truth most of us discover sooner or later, usually without announcing it out loud. The past does not stay still, not in the way we live with it anyway. Even when the facts remain fixed, the feeling of them continues to shift, like a photograph that looks different depending on the light. Think about a memory you've carried for many years. Perhaps it once felt heavy, even sharp, something you replayed often, wishing it had gone another way. Now notice how that same memory feels today. Chances are it has softened, or perhaps it has gained context. What once seemed like a defining failure may now look like a narrow passage you had to walk through to reach something else. Nothing about the event itself has changed, and yet in a very real sense your past is no longer the same past you once lived with. This is because memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. Each time you remember something, your mind quietly rebuilds it, blending facts with perspective, emotion, and what you've learned since. The past you experience is always shaped by the present you bring to it. We often overlook how profound this is. We tend to speak of the past as if it were a solid object, locked behind us, unreachable and complete. But our inner experience tells a different story. It tells us that yesterday is something we keep carrying forward, reshaping as we go. There is a useful distinction here. There is the past of documents, timestamps, and shared records. And then there is the personal past, the one that lives inside you. The first is stable. The second is alive. Tonight's exploration is concerned with that living past, not because it replaces reality, but because it is the version that actually influences your choices, your fears, your hopes, and your sense of who you are. This is where many people feel a subtle tension. If the past can feel different over time, does that mean it is unreliable? Does it mean anything can be changed if we reinterpret it enough? The answer is gentler than either yes or no. It means that meaning is not a one-time assignment. Meaning unfolds. Imagine reading a letter written years ago. When you first received it, it might have felt confusing or even hurtful. Reading it now, you may notice kindness where you once saw distance, or uncertainty where you once assumed intention. The words are identical. What has changed is the lens through which you read them. In this way, the present moment is always quietly collaborating with the past. It does not overwrite it. It highlights different parts, like adjusting the focus on a camera lens. Some details sharpen, others blur into the background. This idea prepares us for something important. When we later talk about physics and probability, it will be tempting to imagine the past as a fixed block and the present as something that slams into it. But a more accurate picture is softer. The past is not a wall. It is a landscape with contours that become visible only as you move through them. Consider how often a past event becomes meaningful only later. A chance meeting that seemed trivial at the time. A delayed decision that later proves crucial. In the moment, these experiences pass unnoticed. Only with distance do they reveal their role in the larger pattern. This delay in meaning is not a flaw in human perception. It may be a feature of how complex systems unfold. Sometimes significance requires context, and context, by definition, comes later. If you allow this thought to settle, it can change how you relate to regret. Regret often assumes that the past should have been clear at the time, that you failed to see what was obvious, but if meaning itself takes time to form, then many choices were never truly obvious when they were made. They were made inside fog. Seeing the past this way does not remove responsibility. You are still accountable for your actions, but it replaces harsh judgment with understanding. You acted with the information and clarity available to you at that moment. The rest emerged later. This is where the idea of almosts returns, now with a different tone. Those near misses and near choices are not ghosts haunting you from behind. They are alternative paths that help define the terrain you're walking now, even if you never stepped fully onto them. In this sense, your life story is not a single thread pulled tight from beginning to end. It is more like a woven fabric, with strands crossing, supporting, and occasionally fading. Some threads are bright because you keep returning to them. Others remain faint but still part of the structure. As we move forward, we will begin to explore how modern physics describes reality at its deepest levels. You will hear about experiments that suggest the universe itself may delay certain decisions until the full context is available. Not because it is uncertain, but because it is thorough. For now, it is enough to notice this simple truth. You are not dragging a frozen past behind you. You're carrying a living one. And the way you stand in the present influences which parts of that past feel close, which feel distant, and which quietly guide your next step. Let that idea rest. There is no need to resolve it. Like many things worth understanding, it works best when you allow it to remain slightly unfinished. Imagine holding a coin in your hand. Somewhere far away, perhaps in another city or on another continent, someone else holds a coin that looks exactly the same. You flip yours. It lands heads. At that very moment, the other person flips theirs, and it also lands heads. You try again. Tails and again, tails. Over and over, the results match in ways that feel oddly coordinated. If this happened in everyday life, you would assume there was a trick. Maybe the coins were weighted. Maybe someone was signalling. Maybe the outcomes were arranged in advance. Our intuition is deeply trained to look for hidden causes when coincidences repeat themselves. Quantum entanglement begins with a coincidence like this, but then quietly removes all the usual explanations. In the quantum world, entanglement describes a situation where two particles are prepared together in such a way that their outcomes are linked. Not because one sends a message to the other, and not because each carries a secret instruction waiting to be revealed, but because the pair must be described as a single system, even when separated by great distances. To keep this gentle, let's replace particles with something familiar. Imagine two gloves placed into separate boxes. One glove is left-handed, the other right-handed. The boxes are sealed and sent far apart. When you open one box and find a left glove, you instantly know the other box contains the right glove. Nothing travelled between the boxes at the moment you opened them. You simply learned something about a relationship that was already there. Entanglement feels similar at first, but then goes a step further. With gloves, the handedness was decided in advance. With entangled particles, the specific outcome is not settled until the moment of measurement. Until then, the system is better described as holding multiple possibilities at once, waiting for interaction to bring one forward. This is where our everyday intuition begins to wobble, and that is perfectly fine. The universe is under no obligation to feel familiar. The important thing to hold on to is this: when one part of an entangled pair is measured, the result on the other side does not arrive as a message. It arrives as a correlation. When the two results are later compared, patterns emerge that are stronger and more precise than anything classical explanations can easily account for. This distinction matters deeply for our journey. Correlation is not control. Knowing that two outcomes line up does not mean you can choose which outcome appears. Locally, each result still looks random. Only when the outcomes are brought together does the hidden order reveal itself. You might think of it like two people writing separate journals without communicating. Each entry on its own feels ordinary. But when the journals are compared later, striking parallels appear, not because the writers coordinated each sentence, but because they were responding to a shared situation in their own ways. This is why physicists emphasize that entanglement does not allow information to travel faster than light or backward through time. There is no lever to pull, no button to press. The universe allows connection, but not exploitation. And yet, even without control, the existence of such deep correlation is remarkable. It suggests that reality is not built from isolated pieces that merely bump into each other. Instead, it hints at a structure where relationships come first and individual outcomes are secondary. This idea resonates with something we already know about our own lives. meaning often emerges in hindsight. Events that seemed unconnected at the time later reveal a pattern when viewed together. The pattern was not obvious while you were inside it, but it becomes visible once enough pieces are on the table. Entanglement invites us to imagine that the universe itself may work this way, that some aspects of reality only make sense when seen in pairs, or networks, or wholes, rather than as independent fragments. To keep our footing, let's pause and restate the boundary gently. Nothing in entanglement suggests that your present thoughts can send instructions to the past. There is no mechanism for steering outcomes retroactively. What entanglement does offer is something quieter and, in a way, more poetic. It offers the idea that separation may be less complete than it appears, and that timing may be more subtle than we assume. Instead of asking, "Can I change what happened?" entanglement nudges us to ask a different question. How are events related in ways I don't immediately see? This shift in question is important. It turns our attention away from control and toward understanding, away from forcing outcomes and toward noticing patterns. As we move deeper into this territory, we will encounter experiments where choices made later affect how earlier events are described, without changing their physical record. These experiments can feel unsettling at first, as if the future were leaning back toward the past. But with patience, they reveal something more nuanced. They show that context matters, and that meaning may wait until the whole story is available. For now, let the image of the two coins rest with you. Not as a puzzle to solve, but as a quiet suggestion. Perhaps the universe, like those coins, is less about isolated flips and more about shared conditions, less about single moments and more about relationships that unfold across time. If your mind drifts as you listen, that is perfectly fine. Entanglement is not meant to be pinned down quickly. It is meant to loosen the grip of certainty, just enough to allow a gentler picture of reality to form. And as that picture forms, we begin to sense how the past, the present, and even the stories we tell about them may be woven together more delicately than we once believed. When Albert Einstein first encountered the implications of entanglement, he used a phrase that has echoed ever since. He called it spooky action at a distance. The words linger because they capture a genuine discomfort. Something about entanglement seems to reach across space without asking permission, as if reality were whispering behind our backs. But it helps to remember that Einstein was reacting from within a particular picture of the universe. In that picture, objects are separate, self-contained, and influenced only by what touches them or sends a clear signal. From that viewpoint, strong correlations appearing across distance feel suspicious. They feel like a trick. What later experiments showed, again and again, is that the trick is not happening where we thought it was. There is no hidden message travelling between distant particles. There is no invisible thread carrying instructions at the moment of measurement. Instead, the strangeness lives in our assumptions about how independent things are allowed to be. To understand this, imagine two clocks built in the same workshop. They are set together and then carried to opposite sides of a city. Each clock ticks on its own. No signals pass between them, yet when you check them later, they still show the same time. The matching readings are not the result of communication in the moment. They are the result of shared origin and shared structure. Entanglement resembles this image, but with a crucial twist. The clock's times were set in advance. With entangled particles, the specific outcomes are not decided until interaction occurs. Until then, it is as if the universe is saying, "I know the relationship, but I have not yet committed to the details." This is where physicists asked a careful question. Could the details be stored secretly, waiting to be revealed later? Could each particle carry a hidden list of answers, ensuring the correlations without any need for mystery? To test this idea, Scientists designed experiments that forced the universe to choose between two options. Either outcomes were being decided locally, with hidden instructions, or the correlations truly could not be explained by any story that treats distant parts as fully independent. Over many trials, under carefully controlled conditions, the results consistently favoured the second option. This does not mean the universe is violating rules. It means the rules are deeper than our everyday expectations. At this point, it is tempting to imagine entanglement as a kind of influence that leaps instantly across space. But that image quietly smuggles in an assumption of control. Influence suggests intention, direction, and command. Entanglement has none of these. A better image is constraint. Once two things are entangled, not all combinations of outcomes are allowed. The universe quietly limits the possible patterns, even though each local result still feels random. It is like rolling two dice that are somehow constrained to add up to a certain number. Each die looks unpredictable on its own, but together they tell a consistent story. This is why entanglement does not let you send messages to the past or even across space in any useful way. You cannot choose your outcome. You cannot encode information in it. You only discover what happened when you compare notes later. And yet, the comparison matters. The pattern exists whether or not you notice it. The universe does not wait for approval. It simply offers coherence when the pieces are brought together. This distinction between local randomness and global order is one of the quiet themes of our journey. It appears in physics, but also in life. Many experiences feel chaotic when lived moment by moment. Only later, when enough moments are placed side by side, does a pattern appear. From this perspective, spooky begins to lose its edge. The universe is not reaching backward or sideways with intent. It is maintaining consistency across a structure larger than any single moment. This brings us gently back to our central question. If the universe allows such long-range consistency without messages or commands, could something similar apply to time? Could the present and the past be related in ways that preserve order without enabling control? Notice how carefully the idea is framed. Not influence, not rewriting, not instruction. Relationship. Imagine a tapestry woven from threads that loop forward and back, crossing at many points. No single crossing dictates the entire pattern. But once the tapestry exists, every thread is part of a coherent whole. Tugging on one section does not erase the others, but it may reveal tensions that were always there. Entanglement invites us to think of reality this way, not as a sequence of isolated snapshots, but as a network of relations that only make full sense when considered together. Time, in this view, may be less like a row of dominoes and more like a woven surface, where distant points remain subtly aligned. It is important to remain honest here. Physics does not currently claim that personal choices reach back to alter micro-decisions in the past. What it does claim is more modest and more intriguing. That the universe does not always assign properties in advance, and that context matters deeply in how outcomes are described. This opens a space for reflection without demanding belief. It allows us to hold the possibility that some aspects of reality remain undefined until the larger pattern is visible, and it reminds us that certainty is often something we assign after the fact. As you listen, you may notice a quiet shift. The idea of control begins to fade, replaced by the idea of participation. You are not commanding the universe. You are part of the unfolding pattern, one thread among many. In the next part of our journey, we will look at experiments where choices made later affect how earlier events are grouped and understood. These stories can feel like time bending back on itself, but as with entanglement, the truth is gentler. It is not about changing what happened. It is about how the universe keeps its stories consistent, For now, let the word spooky soften. What once seemed frightening may simply be unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things, when approached slowly, often turn out to be less about danger and more about depth. There is a rule woven so gently into the fabric of reality that most people never notice it. It does not announce itself with alarms or barriers. Instead, it behaves like a calm guardian, allowing wonder while quietly preventing chaos. This rule says, in essence, that connection is allowed, but communication is not. You can think of it as the universe's way of protecting time. When we spoke about entanglement, we described outcomes that line up in surprising ways. These alignments can feel as though something has reached across distance or time to coordinate events. But if that were truly happening, if outcomes could be steered deliberately, then cause and effect would lose their order. Messages could arrive before they were sent. Decisions could be undone before they were made. The universe would become a tangle of contradictions, and yet it does not. Instead, something subtler happens. Each local outcome, viewed on its own, looks ordinary and unpredictable. Like flipping a coin in a quiet room, you cannot tell what will appear until it lands. There is no hint embedded in the moment itself. Only later, when results are brought together and compared, does the hidden structure emerge. This is the key distinction that keeps everything calm. Patterns exist, but they reveal themselves only in hindsight. Imagine two people watching the same fireworks display from different hills. Each person sees flashes of light, hears echoes, and feels small vibrations through the ground. On their own, the experiences feel random and disconnected. But when the two people meet the next day and talk about what they saw, the pattern becomes clear. They were witnessing the same event from different angles. The coherence was always there, but it did not announce itself in real time. The universe works in much the same way. It allows shared structure, but only reveals it when information is combined through ordinary, time-respecting means. This is why entanglement does not allow messages to be sent faster than light or backward through time. There is no switch you can flip to choose your outcome. There's no way to encode meaning into the randomness. The rule is simple and unwavering. You may observe, but you may not command. At first, this can feel disappointing. We often hope that the strange beauty of physics might grant us power over the moments we regret. But with a little patience, the deeper kindness of this rule begins to show itself. If the universe allowed backward messages, every moment would be unstable. Every decision could be undermined by information from a future that has not yet formed. The present would lose its weight. Choice itself would become meaningless. Instead, the universe grants us something quieter and more human. It allows us to understand patterns only after we have lived them. It gives us clarity, not control. This distinction matters deeply when we return to our central question about the past. If present choices could send instructions backward, then the past would be endlessly revisable. Responsibility would blur, meaning would thin. But if present choices can only influence how patterns are selected, noticed, and carried forward, then the past remains stable while our relationship to it evolves. You might notice that this already describes much of your inner life. You cannot change what happened yesterday, but you can change which parts of yesterday shape how you act today. Some memories loosen their grip, others gain new relevance. The facts remain, but their influence shifts. This is not a failure of memory, it is a feature of adaptation. When physicists describe this protective rule, they're not trying to shut down imagination. They are mapping the boundaries within which imagination remains meaningful. Within those boundaries, there is room to explore how context reshapes interpretation, how timing alters significance, and how meaning may arrive late without being false. This brings us gently toward the idea that the universe may delay certain descriptions until all the necessary information is available, not because the past is undecided, but because its role in the larger story is not yet complete. Think of a piece of music. The first few notes do not reveal the entire melody. Their meaning becomes clear only as the song unfolds. If you stopped too early, you might misinterpret what you heard. The notes themselves do not change, but their place in the whole becomes clearer with time. In the same way, some events in your life may not reveal their significance until years later. At the time, they feel ordinary or even disappointing. Only when enough moments have gathered around them do they begin to make sense. This does not mean the future is reaching back to rearrange the notes. It means the song was always larger than any single moment could reveal. As we move forward, we will encounter experiments that make this idea feel almost tangible. Experiments where the way we choose to group outcomes later affects how we describe what happened earlier. These stories can feel unsettling, as if time itself were being nudged. But held gently, they reveal something reassuring. The universe is careful. It does not allow paradox. It preserves order, even while inviting wonder. For now, rest with this quiet law: connection without control, pattern without command, meaning without manipulation. There is a deep peace in knowing that reality is structured enough to be coherent, yet open enough to remain mysterious, and in that balance, our lives unfold, not as scripts written in advance, and not as chaos without form, but as stories that gain clarity as they are lived. Let that thought settle. You're not late to understanding your past. Understanding often arrives exactly when it is able to. If you pause for a moment and imagine the space around you, it probably feels empty. Air, perhaps. Distance. A quiet gap between objects. We tend to picture the universe this way, as a collection of things separated by space, each minding its own business. But there is another way to imagine it, one that feels softer and in some ways more intimate. Instead of emptiness, picture an ocean. Not one with waves you can see, but a calm, invisible sea that everything rests within. In this picture, objects are not isolated islands, they are patterns in the same water. Physicists often use the word field to describe this idea, but we do not need the word itself. We can stay with the image. A field is simply something that exists everywhere, quietly, even when nothing obvious is happening. It is the background that allows motion, interaction, and structure to appear. Think about a breeze passing through tall grass. You do not see the air itself. You see its effects. Blades bend together. Ripples travel across the field. The motion looks coordinated, not because the grass is communicating, but because all of it is responding to the same underlying flow. Entanglement begins to feel less strange when seen this way. Two distant particles are not shouting across emptiness. They're responding to shared conditions within a deeper fabric. Their correlations are not messages, they are echoes of structure. This image helps us move beyond the idea that reality is built from tiny, separate pieces that must constantly inform one another. Instead, it suggests that relationships come first, and individual events are expressions of those relationships. When we apply this to time, something interesting happens. Time stops feeling like a rigid line of moments stacked end to end. It begins to feel more like a landscape you move through, where different points remain subtly connected even as you walk forward. This does not mean the future is already written, or that the past is malleable in a literal sense. It means that the universe may keep track of consistency across the whole picture, not just moment by moment. Imagine watching a river from above. From the bank, you see only the water passing in front of you. From the sky, you see the bends, the branches, the places where streams split and rejoin. The water at any one point does not know the shape of the whole river, but the river still has a shape. In our daily lives, we stand on the bank. We experience one moment at a time. Physics, in its own quiet way, suggests that there may be a broader view in which patterns extend beyond the present instant. This brings us gently to the question of measurement. When does a possibility become an event? When does a vague could be settle into a definite was? In everyday terms, measurement is just interaction. It is contact, a glance, a touch, a decision, a recording. Nothing mystical is required. When something interacts with its surroundings strongly enough, it becomes part of a shared story. Before that interaction, possibilities can overlap without conflict. Afterward, one outcome stands out, not because it was chosen from nowhere, but because it fit coherently with everything else involved. This is why the universe appears patient. It does not rush to decide details until it must. And when it does decide, it does so in a way that preserves consistency across the entire fabric. You may notice how similar this feels to human understanding. Often, you do not know what something meant until you have lived beyond it. The meaning of a conversation, a decision, or a loss may remain unclear until it finds its place among other experiences. The event occurred, but its role in your life was undecided for a while. Seeing reality this way allows us to approach the past with a little more kindness. If meaning unfolds rather than arriving all at once, then confusion and uncertainty are not failures. They are natural states within a larger process. This perspective also explains why certain experiences feel as though they connect across time. A lesson learned years later suddenly illuminates an earlier struggle. A relationship gains new significance long after it ended. These moments can feel as though the present is reaching backward, but what is really happening is that the pattern is becoming visible. The underlying field did not change, your position within it did. As we complete this part of the journey, it is important to rest again in the boundary that keeps everything stable. No hidden layer of reality allows us to send instructions to yesterday. No field grants wishes or rearranges events. What it offers instead is coherence, a way for the universe to remain whole even when viewed from limited perspectives. In the next phase of our exploration, we will look at experiments that bring this idea into sharp focus. Experiments where the choice of how to interpret results is made after the events themselves have occurred. These stories can feel unsettling at first, as if time were folding back on itself. But approached gently, they reveal something reassuring. They show that reality waits for context, not commands. For now, let the image of the quiet ocean stay with you. Everything you see is a pattern on its surface. Everything you feel is a ripple moving through it. You're not separate from this field. You're one of its expressions. And just as waves do not argue with the water they rise from, your moments do not stand apart from the larger flow of time. They belong to it. They contribute to it, and they find their meaning within it, slowly, patiently, as the pattern continues to unfold. Imagine setting out on a walk without deciding why you're walking. You leave your home, turn a corner, follow the street, and only when you arrive somewhere do you say, this was a commute, or perhaps, no, this was a stroll. The path you took does not change, but the story you tell about it does. This simple idea turns out to be surprisingly important. In the world of physics, there are experiments designed around a similar principle. They are sometimes called delayed choice experiments, but the name sounds far more dramatic than the experience itself. At their heart, these experiments ask a gentle question. What if the way we choose to describe an event is decided after the event has already taken place? This is not about changing the past. It is about understanding it. To keep this soft and approachable, imagine light as a traveller moving through a maze with two possible routes. The traveller sets off, passes through the maze and arrives at a destination. Only after the journey is complete do we decide what question to ask. Did the traveller take one route, like a person choosing a single hallway? Or did the traveller explore multiple routes at once, like a mist spreading through space? The surprising result is this. The answer depends on the question we ask later. If we ask a question that focuses on routes, the story we tell is one of paths and choices. If we ask a question that focuses on patterns, the story becomes one of overlap and harmony. Both stories are consistent with the same physical journey. Nothing about the traveller's motion needs to be rewritten. What changes is the frame. This is where many people feel a flicker of unease. It can sound as though the present is reaching backward, deciding what the past really was. But that feeling comes from assuming that the past must already carry a single, complete description waiting to be uncovered. These experiments suggest something gentler. The past carries the capacity for multiple descriptions, and context selects which one becomes relevant. Think of a photograph taken in dim light. At first glance, it may look like a blur. Later, with better lighting or magnification, details emerge. The image was always there. The information was always present. What changed was your ability to interpret it. Delayed choice experiments operate in this interpretive space. They do not alter recorded facts. They alter which relationships matter when facts are grouped together. This distinction matters deeply for our larger question about personal history. If later context can influence how earlier events are described without altering their physical record, then the idea of a whispered suggestion begins to feel less mystical and more structural. It is not about commanding reality. It is about how meaning settles. You already live with this every day. A conversation from years ago may have felt insignificant at the time. Later, after new experiences, you realize it marked the beginning of a change. The conversation itself did not change. Its place in your story did. Physics, in its careful language, seems to allow something similar. It allows nature to delay committing to a particular description until all relevant conditions are known. Not because reality is indecisive, but because it is thorough. There is an important boundary to restate here, gently but clearly. These experiments do not allow you to choose outcomes after the fact. You cannot decide what happened once the journey is complete. You can only decide how to organize and interpret what is already there. In this sense, delayed choice is not a loophole in time. It is a lesson in humility. It reminds us that our categories are tools, not truths carved into stone. This has a calming implication. If meaning often arrives later, then confusion in the moment is not a failure. It is a natural stage. You are allowed not to know yet what something will become. This idea can be especially soothing when applied to regret. Many regrets assume that the correct meaning of a moment was obvious at the time and that you somehow missed it. But if meaning itself depends on future context, then some moments could not have been fully understood when they occurred. They needed time. The universe, it seems, is comfortable with this delay. It does not rush to label everything immediately. It allows possibilities to coexist quietly until a larger picture forms. As we move forward, we will encounter experiments that go even further, where information is intentionally set aside and later brought back, reshaping how earlier events are grouped. These stories can feel almost playful, like puzzles that reveal their trick only after you've sat with them for a while. For now, let this idea settle. The past may be complete in facts but unfinished in meaning, and the present does not rewrite yesterday. It listens to it, frames it, and carries it forward into a story that continues to unfold. If your thoughts drift, let them drift. The universe itself seems to take its time deciding how things fit together. There's no need to hurry. Imagine sorting through a box of old photographs. Some images show faces clearly, others are blurred, overexposed, or partially hidden by shadow. As you sift through them, you decide to create an album. You choose which photos to include, which to leave out, and how to arrange them. When the album is finished, the story it tells feels coherent, intentional, even inevitable. Yet nothing about the photographs themselves has changed. No image has been altered. No moment has been erased. What has changed is which information you chose to keep in focus. This quiet act of sorting turns out to be one of the most important ideas in modern physics, especially when we talk about experiments that seem to reach backward in time. In certain experiments, information about how something travelled is deliberately marked, then later ignored or brought back into consideration. When the information is kept, one kind of story emerges. When it is set aside, a different story appears. Both stories are consistent. Both are true within their own frames. This is often described with the word erasing, but that word can be misleading. Nothing is destroyed, nothing is undone. It is more accurate to say that information is either included in the story or allowed to fade into the background. Think about listening to music through a wall. You can hear the rhythm and the melody, but not the lyrics. Later, you step into the room and hear the words clearly. The song did not change. Only your access to its details did. In these experiments, something similar happens. When information about a path or history is available, the outcomes arrange themselves one way. When that information is unavailable or ignored, outcomes arrange themselves another way. The physical events remain unchanged. What shifts is the pattern that becomes visible. This is where the illusion of retroactive influence arises. It can feel as though a later decision about what to pay attention to is altering what happened earlier. But what is really happening is more modest and more profound. The universe is allowing multiple potential descriptions to exist until the full context is known. This idea fits naturally with how we live our lives. You may remember an event as painful for years, only to reinterpret it later as necessary or even meaningful. The event itself didn't change. Your access to its significance did. When physics shows us something similar at the smallest scales, it is tempting to reach for grand conclusions, to imagine that the past itself is fluid and responsive to our wishes. But the experiments ask for restraint. They show us that nature is careful. It does not allow arbitrary changes. It allows coherence. The key word here is selection. In the photograph album, selection determines the story. In life, attention determines which experiences shape us most strongly. In physics, selection determines which correlations become visible. Selection is not force. It is not control. It is an act of framing. This is why the idea of a whispered cosmic suggestion works best as a metaphor, not a mechanism. The universe does not listen for instructions. It responds to structure. When certain information is grouped together, certain patterns appear. When it is not, other patterns emerge. You might notice how calming this is when applied to personal history. It suggests that you're not haunted by fixed meanings. You're not trapped by a single interpretation of what happened. As new information enters your life, the past reorganizes itself naturally within your understanding. This does not mean you can erase harm or bypass responsibility. Painful facts remain painful facts. But it does mean that their role in your ongoing story is not frozen. This is also why lucky breaks often feel magical in hindsight. At the time, they're just moments. Only later do they align into a story of opportunity. The alignment did not require intervention, it required context. As we move deeper, we will soon encounter experiments where even relationships between particles appear to be assigned after the fact. These stories can sound as though cause and effect have been inverted. But as before, the inversion is in description, not in reality itself. For now, let this idea settle gently. Erasing does not mean destroying. Forgetting does not mean losing. Sometimes it simply means allowing certain details to rest while others come forward. The past, it seems, is not a fixed sculpture. It is a landscape that reveals different features depending on where you stand, and where you stand now matters. Imagine two strangers standing at opposite ends of a long hall. They have never met. They have never spoken. As far as anyone can tell, their lives are entirely separate. Now imagine a third moment later on, when both are invited into the same room for a brief conversation. Something happens there. Perhaps they discover a shared memory, a common friend, or a moment that binds their stories together. Only after that meeting do we begin to speak of them as connected. Nothing about their earlier lives has changed, and yet from this point on we tell their stories differently. Entanglement swapping follows a remarkably similar pattern. In this kind of experiment, two pairs of particles are prepared separately. Within each pair, the particles share a special relationship, but the two pairs themselves have nothing to do with each other. They are strangers in every meaningful sense. Some members of these pairs are sent far apart, while others are brought together later for a joint interaction. Here is the surprising part. After that joint interaction, when scientists look back at the distant particles and group the results in a particular way, those distant particles now behave as if they were entangled all along. Not because anything travelled between them, and not because the past was altered, but because a relationship is assigned based on a later, shared event. It can feel unsettling at first. It sounds as though a handshake occurred after the introduction, as though a connection was created retroactively. But this feeling fades when we remember what is actually happening. Nothing new happens to the distant particles themselves. Their individual outcomes were already recorded. The change occurs in how we organise the information. When we condition our view on the later joint event, a new pattern becomes visible. The pattern was not meaningful before because the context was missing. This is why it helps to think of entanglement swapping as bookkeeping rather than time travel. The universe is not sending instructions backward. It is allowing a consistent way to group events once all relevant pieces are on the table. Imagine again the photo album. You take many pictures throughout your life, most of which sit quietly in boxes. Years later, you create an album around a theme. When you arrange the photos this way, relationships between distant moments suddenly appear. Two people who never met in the same frame now seem connected by a shared story. The photos themselves have not changed. The meaning emerges through selection. Entanglement swapping works in much the same way. The later joint measurement provides the theme. When earlier results are grouped according to that theme, correlations appear that were invisible before. This distinction is crucial for keeping our feet on the ground. The past is not being rewritten, it is being redescribed. At this point, you might notice how naturally this idea fits with everyday experience. Many moments in life feel ordinary when they occur. Only later do they reveal their importance. A brief conversation turns out to be the beginning of a career shift. A casual decision leads to a friendship that reshapes your life. Looking back, it can feel as though the meaning of those moments was waiting to be assigned. This feeling of retroactive significance does not require physics to be real. It is part of how stories work. But physics, interestingly, seems comfortable with the same structure. It allows relationships to become meaningful only when a larger context is available. What matters here is restraint. Entanglement swapping does not allow us to choose which relationships appear. We cannot decide after the fact which particles will behave as if they were connected. The later joint event has its own randomness, its own unpredictability. We simply observe what occurred and organize the information accordingly. This is why the universe remains safe. There is no lever to pull, no message to encode, no way to exploit the effect. The rule that protects time remains intact, and yet the emotional impact is real. Seeing that relationships can be assigned after the fact invites us to soften our understanding of when meaning begins. It suggests that some connections are not fully defined in the moment they occur. They wait. This perspective can be surprisingly comforting. It allows us to stop demanding that every moment reveal its purpose immediately. It gives us permission to trust that understanding may arrive later, when more of the story is visible. If you apply this gently to your own past, you may notice a shift. Instead of asking why a moment felt meaningless at the time, you can ask what context it was waiting for. Instead of assuming you missed something obvious, you can consider that it was not yet ready to be seen. Entanglement swapping does not tell us that the past is changeable. It tells us that relationships are sometimes incomplete until the right meeting occurs. That meeting can be physical, emotional, or informational. Once it happens, the story reorganizes itself naturally. As we prepare to move on, it is helpful to hold on to one quiet sentence. Nothing travels backward, meaning travels forward. The universe, it seems, is not in a hurry to label everything. It allows moments to exist quietly, without explanation, until the conditions for understanding arise. And when they do, the past does not resist. It simply settles into a pattern that makes sense of the whole. Let this idea rest with you. Some of the most important handshakes in life happen long after the introduction. And that does not make them any less real. There is a moment in almost every deep exploration where curiosity leans a little too far forward, where a beautiful idea begins to whisper something dangerous. In our journey, that moment arrives here. If later context can reshape how earlier events are described, and if relationships can appear meaningful only after a future meeting, then a tempting thought naturally follows. What if the future is not just explaining the past, but influencing it? What if time itself is not strictly one way? This idea has a name. Retrocausality. It sounds dramatic, almost cinematic, because flowing backward, effects arriving before their reasons, a universe where tomorrow quietly nudges yesterday into place. Some physicists do explore this possibility, not as a settled truth, but as a question. They wonder whether the rules of nature might look similar when read forward and backward, the way a simple melody can be played in reverse and still sound coherent. In these time-symmetric pictures, the universe is not rushing from past to future, but existing as a whole, with constraints that apply across time rather than through it. It is an elegant thought, and it is deeply tempting. But elegance is not the same as evidence, and here patience matters. Retrocausality remains an interpretation, not an established mechanism for personal influence. It is one way of telling the mathematical story, not a proven description of how everyday events unfold. Importantly, even within these interpretations, there is no suggestion that people can send intentions backward to change their own histories. The danger of retrocausality is not scientific, it is emotional. It invites the idea that the past might be negotiable, that regret could be undone if only we understood the right trick. That temptation is understandable. We all carry moments we wish had gone differently. But physics, when listened to carefully, does not offer that escape. It offers something quieter and in many ways more humane. Even in time-symmetric descriptions, the universe does not grant control, it grants consistency. Outcomes must fit together across the whole picture, forward and backward alike. This does not create freedom to rewrite, it creates obligation to cohere. A helpful way to think about this is to imagine a crossword puzzle. Each word constrains the others. You cannot change a letter in one place without affecting many answers elsewhere. The puzzle does not care which direction you fill it in. What matters is that, in the end, everything fits. Time-symmetric ideas suggest the universe may work more like that puzzle than like a one-way conveyor belt. But notice what this means. You're not free to change a single answer without consequence. The structure resists arbitrary edits. This is why, even at the most speculative edges of physics, the rule protecting time remains in place. There is no channel for sending usable information backward, no way to select a preferred outcome after the fact, no method for erasing mistakes. Instead, what remains possible is something much subtler: the weighting of possibilities, the selection of narratives, the way patterns become visible only when the whole configuration is known. This brings us to a safer and more grounded way of talking about influence. Not influence over the past, but influence over which futures grow from it. Think again of probability as weather. You cannot command the wind, but you can choose when to sail. You cannot undo yesterday's storm, but you can decide which direction to walk today, knowing the ground has changed. In this frame, the present does not reach back to fix yesterday. It reaches forward from yesterday, carrying certain threads more strongly than others. The past supplies many starting points. The present chooses how to move among them. This is where the idea of nudging odds replaces the fantasy of rewriting history. You cannot create an impossible outcome. You cannot turn a closed door into an open one, but you may influence which open doors you notice, which paths feel viable, and which patterns repeat. Retrocausality, when stripped of its dramatic language, becomes less about backward action and more about global consistency. The universe behaves as if it cares about the entire story making sense, not just moment-by-moment causation. Seen this way, the allure of retrocausality softens. It no longer promises escape from regret. It offers coherence. It suggests that your life is not a collection of isolated mistakes and accidents, but a pattern that can still settle into meaning. This distinction is crucial as we move forward. From here on, we will stop asking whether the past can be changed. We will ask a different question. Given the past as it is, how do probabilities unfold from here? How do small choices repeated over time shape which version of the story you end up living? This shift is not a retreat from wonder. It is a refinement of it. It replaces magical thinking with something sturdier, a sense that agency lives in attention, persistence, and timing, not in bending the rules of reality. As this session comes to rest, notice how your body responds. The idea of controlling the past often brings tension. The idea of working with probability often brings relief. You're not required to fix everything. You're invited to participate. In the next part of our journey, we will step fully into this participation. We will explore a landscape of branching paths, gentle turns, and cumulative nudges. A place where the future is open, not because the past is weak, but because possibility is rich. For now, let the temptation of retrocausality pass like a thought you do not need to chase. It is interesting. It is beautiful, and it is not required. The universe offers enough wonder without asking us to break time. Picture a garden at dawn. The grass is still wet. The air is cool and quiet. Across the garden run many faint paths, some clear and firm, others barely visible, as if only a few feet have ever passed that way. From above, the garden looks like a web of possibilities. From where you stand, you see only a handful of choices at once. Your life unfolds in much the same way. Each day is not a single road stretching forward, but a cluster of tiny turns, not dramatic forks with signposts, but subtle shifts in timing, tone, openness, and courage. A pause before speaking. A decision to follow curiosity for 5 more minutes. A choice to rest instead of push, or to reach out instead of retreat. These are the footsteps that shape the garden. Probability in this picture is not a number written on a page. It is the thickness of a trail. A path becomes thicker not because it was destined, but because it was walked. Each time you choose it, the ground presses down a little more. Each time you avoid it, the grass begins to rise again. This is a far gentler way to think about possibility than the idea of branching universes splitting dramatically at every decision. You do not need to imagine countless versions of yourself vanishing into parallel worlds. You can imagine one garden, many paths, and a pattern that slowly emerges as you move. When we say that the present may influence which version of the past feels most real, this is what we mean. The events of yesterday do not change. The paths you did not take do not suddenly become taken, but the way those past moments connect to your present choices can shift. Imagine looking back at a decision you made years ago. At the time, it felt small. Later, it becomes a turning point. The moment itself did not grow larger. The path leading away from it did. This is how micro-decisions accumulate. A single step rarely defines a journey, but many small steps taken in similar directions create a route that begins to feel inevitable. In physics, probability behaves in a surprisingly similar way. Outcomes are not forced, they are weighted. Certain patterns become more likely because they fit smoothly with what has already occurred. Others fade not because they were impossible, but because they were less supported by the surrounding conditions. Translating this into human terms can be comforting. It means that your life is not a rigid script, but it is also not a random scramble. It is a conversation between what has happened and what you do next. Notice how this reframes regret. Regret often assumes that one wrong step ruined the garden forever. But in a landscape of many trails, no single step carries that kind of power. Paths can thicken again. New routes can emerge alongside old ones. The garden responds over time. This does not mean that consequences vanish. Some paths lead to cliffs. Some mistakes cause harm that must be acknowledged and repaired. But even then, the future does not collapse into a single narrow corridor. It remains a space of movement, shaped by attention and care. This is where the idea of gentle nudges belongs. A nudge is not a push off a cliff. It is a slight turn of the body, a change in posture, a decision to place your foot here rather than there. Over time, nudges matter precisely because they are small enough to repeat. From the outside, these changes may look unremarkable. From the inside, they can feel transformative. Not because reality bent to your will, but because you aligned yourself with certain possibilities and allowed them to grow. It is tempting at this point to imagine the past itself shifting under your feet. But remember the boundary we have carried all along. The garden does not rearrange itself overnight. You do not wake up in a different landscape. What changes is which paths you notice, which you trust, and which you are willing to walk again. The present moment plays a quiet role here. By choosing how you act now, you select which parts of the past remain relevant. A past failure may lose its grip when you take a small risk today. A forgotten interest may return to life when you follow it for an afternoon. The facts of the past remain, but their influence is reweighted. This is not magic, it is continuity. You can think of it like tuning an old radio. The stations are already there. You're not creating new signals. but by adjusting the dial slowly, patiently, you bring one voice into clarity while others fade into static. The radio does not travel back in time to change the broadcast, it simply selects what becomes audible. As this idea settles, you may feel a subtle shift in responsibility. Not the heavy responsibility of having to fix everything, but the lighter responsibility of choosing where to place your next step. You're not asked to redesign the garden, you're asked to walk it with care. In the sessions ahead, we will explore how attention, interaction, and intention fit into this picture without becoming mystical forces. We will look at how focusing on certain patterns changes behavior, and how behavior, repeated gently, changes what feels possible. For now, let yourself rest in this image. A garden with many trails, some well-worn, some just beginning. The past laid down the ground, the present chooses the next footstep, and over time, a path appears. You do not need to know where every trail leads. You only need to choose where to place your foot, softly, and see what responds. There's a word that appears often when people talk about quantum ideas, a word that sounds abrupt and heavy, like a door slamming shut. That word is collapse. It suggests suddenness, finality, and force. For bedtime listening and for understanding, it is not the best guide. So tonight, we will set that word aside and replace it with 3 gentler ones: settling, tuning, focusing. Each of these words points to the same quiet process, seen from a different angle. Imagine shaking a snow globe. For a moment, everything is suspended. Tiny flecks swirl together, overlapping in soft confusion. Nothing has chosen a place yet. Then you set the globe down. Gradually, without instruction or effort, the glitter drifts and settles. A scene appears, not because it was forced, but because the motion ended. This is a useful image for how possibilities behave. Before interaction, before attention, before engagement, many outcomes can coexist without conflict. Once interaction occurs, possibilities begin to settle into a specific pattern. This settling is not magical, it is physical. It happens when something becomes part of a shared environment, when it leaves the realm of could be and joins the realm of is. In everyday life, we see this constantly. A plan remains vague until you buy a ticket. A thought remains abstract until you speak it out loud. A feeling remains uncertain until you act on it. The act of interaction narrows the field, not because it destroys other possibilities, but because it commits you to one path. This is where tuning becomes a helpful metaphor. Think of an old radio again, one with a smooth dial. As you turn it slowly, static gives way to fragments of sound. A voice fades in and out. With a little patience, one station comes through clearly. The others do not vanish. They simply stop being audible. Your attention works much the same way. When you focus on something, an idea, a goal, a relationship, you tune yourself to certain signals. You notice opportunities related to that focus. You recognize patterns that were always present but previously ignored. Nothing supernatural is required. Your behavior shifts, your timing changes, your responses align differently. Over time, the world you experience seems to respond, not because it changed its rules, but because you changed how you engaged with it. This is why it is important to understand observation as interaction, not as mystical seeing. Observation does not mean staring harder, it means participating, touching, choosing, recording, acting. When you interact with a situation, you become part of its context, and context matters. This is where intent enters the picture, and it is crucial to handle it gently. Intent is not a beam of energy sent into the universe, it is direction for your actions, a way of deciding where to place your effort and attention. If you intend to be more open, You speak differently. You listen longer. You pause before reacting. These small changes alter the kinds of interactions you have. Over time, they alter the paths available to you. Many practices, often grouped under the word manifestation, can be understood this way. When stripped of exaggeration, they are about alignment, not command. About behavior and selection, not bending reality to your wishes. You imagine a possibility. You act in ways that support it. You notice feedback. You adjust. The result can feel uncanny, especially in hindsight, because the steps were small and often invisible at the time. This does not mean that every intention succeeds. The garden still has limits. Some paths are blocked. Some conditions resist change. But within those boundaries, tuning matters. Returning to the image of settling, notice how gentle the process is. The glitter does not slam into place. It drifts. It finds where it belongs. The final picture emerges slowly, almost shyly. This is an important emotional lesson. If reality settled with force, every choice would feel catastrophic. But because it settles gradually, there is room for correction. You can change course. You can retune. The idea of collapse, softened into settling, also helps us let go of anxiety about missing the moment. There is rarely a single instant where everything is decided. Most outcomes are the result of many interactions layered over time. This is why regret often exaggerates the importance of one decision. It imagines a door that closed forever, but in a world that settles rather than snaps, doors tend to close slowly and others open quietly nearby. As we move forward, we will explore how some histories feel preferred over others, not because they were destined, but because they fit smoothly with the surrounding pattern. This smoothness is not fate, it is coherence. For now, let the language remain soft, settling, tuning, focusing. You're not collapsing possibilities with your gaze. You're participating in a process that gradually reveals one path among many. You're not forcing reality, you're joining it. Let that thought rest. Like snow in a globe, things find their place when the shaking stops. There is a quiet tendency you may have noticed in stories. When many plotlines are possible, the story that survives is often the one that fits best with everything around it. It does not stumble. It does not contradict itself. It moves forward smoothly, as if it always belonged there. Physics, in its own careful language, hints at something similar. Rather than imagining reality as choosing randomly among all possibilities, some physicists describe it as favouring patterns that remain consistent as the story unfolds. Not because the universe prefers beauty or simplicity in a poetic sense, but because coherence is stable. Incoherent stories fall apart. Coherent ones persist. This is what we will gently call preferred histories. It is important to hear that phrase correctly. Preferred does not mean chosen in advance. It does not mean fated. It means that when many outcomes are possible, some align more easily with what has already happened and with what is happening next. They require fewer adjustments. They settle without strain. Think again of the garden. Some paths curve naturally around stones and trees. Others cut sharply across roots and uneven ground. You could force yourself along the rough path, but it takes effort, attention, and frequent correction. Over time, most walkers drift toward the path that feels smoother underfoot. The smoother path becomes more visible, not because it was destined, but because it fits the terrain. This idea allows us to talk about luck without mysticism. What we often call luck may simply be the experience of moving along a path that aligns with many small conditions at once. Timing, readiness, environment, and effort meet in a way that feels effortless only in hindsight. Notice how often lucky moments are preceded by long periods of quiet preparation, learning without immediate reward, practicing without recognition, showing up when nothing seems to happen. When the moment finally arrives, it feels sudden, as if the universe intervened. But more often, the ground had been prepared slowly. Preferred histories work this way. They are built from accumulation. This is why tiny choices matter. A single choice rarely determines a life, but many small choices repeated shape the landscape until certain routes feel obvious. When you look back, the story appears clean and direct. From the inside, it was anything but. This perspective also helps us understand synchronicities without inflating them. When you're tuned to certain themes, you notice alignments more readily. Those alignments stand out because they reinforce a story that is already forming. The universe does not need to arrange them. You recognize them because they fit. Think of learning a new word. Once you know it, you begin to hear it everywhere. The word did not suddenly multiply. Your awareness shifted. The pattern became visible. In physics, preferred histories are not a promise that everything will work out. They are a description of how consistency emerges. Paths that conflict too strongly with surrounding conditions tend to fade. Paths that align tend to endure. This does not eliminate struggle, it reframes it. Struggle can be a signal that a path requires more energy than you can sustain. That does not mean the path is wrong. Some meaningful journeys are hard. But it does suggest that ease and resistance are information, not judgments. This reframing can be especially helpful when thinking about the past. If a certain history did not unfold, it may not be because you failed to force it into existence. It may be because the surrounding conditions did not support it at the time. That history remained thin, faint, difficult to walk. Later, conditions can change. New skills, new understanding, new allies. A path that once faded may thicken again. This is where the idea of rewriting yesterday softens into something healthier. You're not altering events. You're altering which stories have room to grow from those events now. The universe, in this view, is not judging your choices. It is responding to patterns. When patterns align, movement feels easier. When they do not, movement requires effort. This understanding carries humility with it. You're not the sole author of your story. You're a participant. Many forces shape the terrain. Recognizing this can relieve the pressure to control everything. It can also inspire patience. If preferred histories emerge from coherence, then rushing rarely helps. Coherence takes time. It builds through repetition, feedback, and adjustment. The story becomes smoother because you learn how to move within it. As this session comes to rest, notice how this idea reframes both success and failure. Success is not proof of worth. Failure is not proof of deficiency. They are signals about alignment, timing, and conditions. In the next session, we will gather these ideas into a single principle, a principle that keeps agency intact while releasing the fantasy of control. The principle of the gentle nudge. For now, let the image remain simple. The universe does not choose your story for you. It responds to the way stories fit together. When they fit smoothly, they carry forward with less resistance. When they do not, they ask for adjustment. You're not here to force the plot. You are here to listen to it step by step and discover which path is becoming real beneath your feet. There's a difference between pushing and nudging, and it is a difference the body understands instinctively. A push demands force. It expects resistance. A nudge, by contrast, is a suggestion offered at just the right angle. It works not because it overpowers, but because it aligns. When we speak of gentle nudges in the context of probability, this is what we mean, not commands sent into the universe. not wishes strong enough to bend reality, but small, repeated adjustments that make certain outcomes more likely to appear simply because they fit better with the direction you're already moving. Think of steering a canoe on a slow river. You do not fight the current. You dip the paddle lightly on one side, then the other. Over time, these tiny corrections keep you oriented. Ignore them and you drift. Overdo them and you tire yourself out. Life responds to nudges in much the same way. A nudge does not create an impossible future. It does not turn a closed door into an open one. It increases the chance of outcomes that were already within reach by making them easier to notice, easier to approach, and easier to sustain. This distinction matters deeply, especially when we talk about responsibility. Gentle nudges do not remove consequences. They do not erase harm. They do not undo commitments. They simply shape what happens next. If you speak more carefully today, it does not rewrite what you said yesterday, but it may change how tomorrow's conversation unfolds. If you take care of your health now, it does not erase past neglect, but it may thicken the path toward recovery. Seen this way, agency becomes something quieter and more sustainable. You're not asked to fix your life in a single dramatic act. You're invited to make small, kind adjustments, again and again, allowing probability to do its patient work. This principle is especially helpful when dealing with regret. Regret often freezes the mind on a single moment, magnifying it until it feels decisive. The gentle nudge principle dissolves that freeze. It shifts the question from "how could I have done that" to "what small step can I take now?" Curiosity replaces self-blame. Repair replaces rumination. In a probability-shaped world, regret loses its absolute authority. It becomes information. A signal about what mattered to you, what you value, and where you might place your next nudge. This does not trivialize pain. Some regrets carry real weight. Some mistakes have lasting effects. But even then, nudges matter. They may not change outcomes quickly, but they can change trajectories. The universe, as we have seen, favors coherence. When your actions begin to align with your values, even in small ways, the surrounding pattern often responds. Opportunities appear not because the universe noticed your effort, but because you placed yourself where those opportunities could meet you. This is why the gentle nudge principle is incompatible with shortcuts. It cannot be rushed. It depends on repetition. It respects limits. It accepts that some things take time. There is a quiet humility in this. You are not special enough to command reality, and you are not powerless enough to be irrelevant. You are somewhere in between, where influence exists without domination. This balance is what keeps the idea ethical. If nudges were strong enough to override others, they would be dangerous. If they were meaningless, they would be pointless. Their power lies precisely in their modesty. As we approach the end of this part, it is worth noticing how far we have travelled from the original temptation to rewrite the past. What remains is something more grounded and perhaps more useful. The past does not need to be rewritten to lose its grip. It needs to be met with new behaviour. You cannot change what happened, but you can change how often it happens again. You can change how it echoes forward. You can change which parts of it define your next step. This is where personal power truly lives, not in bending time, but in shaping habit, not in altering events, but in adjusting responses, not in forcing outcomes, but in cooperating with probability. As this session settles, allow yourself a moment of relief. You're not behind, you're not broken. You're participating in a process that unfolds gradually, responding to care rather than force. In the sessions ahead, we will bring this principle into direct contact with ethics, compassion, and responsibility. We'll ask what it means to live well when the past is firm in fact but soft in meaning. For now, rest with this image: a canoe, a river, a steady hand on the paddle, small movements, repeated gently. Over time, a direction emerges. You do not need to know where the river ends. You only need to keep nudging with care. Regret has a way of tightening the chest. It arrives quietly, often at night, carrying a single sentence that repeats itself with stubborn clarity. If only I had spoken differently. If only I had waited. If only I had gone the other way. These thoughts feel heavy because they compress a long, complex journey into a single frozen frame. They imply that everything hinged on one moment, that a door closed forever, and that you were somehow meant to know it at the time. But life rarely works that way. If we step back into the language we've been building together, regret often mistakes probability for destiny. It treats one outcome as inevitable and all others as permanently lost. Yet the garden we've been walking through does not behave like that. Paths thicken and thin, meaning arrives late. Coherence emerges gradually. The facts of the past are firm. What happened, happened. That truth matters, especially when harm is involved. Responsibility cannot be waved away. But the meaning of what happened and the role it plays in shaping what comes next is not locked in place. Think of regret as a signal rather than a verdict. It points to something you care about. It highlights a value that was violated, ignored, or misunderstood at the time. In that sense, regret contains information, and information, when treated gently, can guide the next nudge. This reframing changes the emotional texture of regret. Instead of a chain that pulls you backward, it becomes a compass that points forward, not toward undoing the past, but toward responding differently now. Consider a missed chance. Perhaps you didn't apply for something you wanted. Years later, you look back and feel the weight of that decision. Regret whispers that you closed the door, but from the perspective of probability, what closed was not a door but a window of conditions. At that time, certain skills were missing, certain supports were absent, certain fears were louder. Today, the conditions are different. The window is not the same window, but other openings exist. The regret does not demand time travel. It asks for a small present action that honors the value it revealed. This is how regret loosens its grip. The same is true for awkward words spoken, opportunities ignored, or relationships mishandled. Regret often imagines a clean alternative timeline where everything went right. In reality, that imagined path carries its own uncertainties, its own costs, its own moments of confusion. The smoothness we project onto it is a trick of hindsight. Understanding this does not excuse mistakes, it contextualizes them. When the past is seen as fixed in facts but fluid in meaning, anxiety begins to soften. You're no longer required to solve yesterday. You're invited to live today with a little more care. This shift is especially important for nighttime listening, when the mind tends to replay errors with merciless precision. At night, the world is quiet and thoughts grow loud. Regret feels larger in the dark. So let's offer the mind a gentler rule. No moment stands alone. No decision carries infinite weight. Patterns form over time, and they can be influenced over time. Tiny present actions matter here more than dramatic gestures. Writing one honest message, setting one boundary, practicing one skill for 10 minutes. These are not heroic acts. They are nudges, and nudges accumulate. From the perspective we've been exploring, this accumulation is where healing lives, not in erasing memory, but in changing its future echoes. A painful event can remain painful and still lose its power to define you. Notice how this preserves responsibility without cruelty. You acknowledge what happened, you feel the regret, and then you ask the only useful question left: what now? That question is not rushed. It does not demand perfection. It invites curiosity. Curiosity is a powerful antidote to regret. Where regret narrows, curiosity opens. Where regret freezes, curiosity moves. It turns self-judgment into exploration. This does not mean every regret leads to a clear action. Some simply ask for acceptance. Some ask for forgiveness, from others or from yourself. Some ask for patience, the hardest nudge of all. In a probability-shaped world, acceptance is not resignation. It is alignment. It recognizes what cannot be changed and places energy where it can still make a difference. As this session settles, you may feel a subtle easing. Regret loses its authority when it is no longer treated as a final sentence. It becomes a footnote, a reminder, a teacher that does not need to shout. You are not late to your life. You are exactly where you are able to respond. The past, with all its firmness, does not forbid kindness, it invites it, and the present, with all its uncertainty, is the only place where that kindness can take form. Let that thought rest. Tonight does not ask you to fix anything. It asks you to loosen the chains that regret wraps around the mind, one breath at a time, and to trust that gentle movement forward is enough. When ideas about time soften, a quiet concern often follows. If the past is not as rigid as we once believed, if meaning can shift and probabilities can be nudged, then what holds us accountable? What keeps us honest with one another? This is an important question, and it deserves a careful answer. A softer past does not mean a careless one. It does not excuse harm, erase responsibility, or blur truth. In fact, it does the opposite. When we stop treating the past as a fixed verdict and start treating it as a shared story still unfolding, our obligations to one another become clearer, not weaker. The facts of what happened remain firm. If someone was hurt, they were hurt. If trust was broken, it was broken. No interpretation, however gentle, can change that. Ethics begins here, with honesty about events. What softens is not the fact, but the frame. A rigid view of time often encourages rigid judgment. It divides people into permanent categories, right or wrong, winner or failure, good or bad. A softer view allows for development. It acknowledges that people act within fog, limited by what they know, feel, and can access at the time. This is not an excuse, it is an explanation. And explanations are the beginning of repair. If microshifts were truly possible, if small choices could subtly shape which paths become real, then humility would be the first ethical response. You would no longer see yourself as a master of outcomes. You would see yourself as a participant among many forces, all moving within uncertainty. Humility changes how we treat one another. It tempers blame. It slows condemnation. It opens space for listening. When we recognize that everyone is navigating probability fog, it becomes harder to assume malice where confusion or fear may have been at work. This does not mean we avoid boundaries. Boundaries are acts of care. They protect what matters. A softer past does not dissolve them. It clarifies why they are needed. Consider an apology. A genuine apology does not claim that the past can be undone. It acknowledges harm and commits to different behavior moving forward. It accepts the permanence of facts while offering change in trajectory. This is the ethical heart of everything we've discussed. You cannot rewrite yesterday, but you can influence what yesterday becomes in the shared future. Compassion fits naturally here. Compassion is not the belief that everything is forgivable without effort. It is the recognition that effort matters because people can change. This recognition extends inward as well. If you are willing to grant others the grace of uncertainty, you may begin to grant it to yourself. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It is the refusal to freeze your identity at your worst moment. A softer view of time encourages responsibility that looks forward. Instead of asking who deserves blame, it asks what repair is possible. Instead of focusing on punishment, it focuses on prevention and growth. In this sense, ethics becomes dynamic. It is less about judging past actions in isolation and more about shaping patterns of behavior over time. This aligns beautifully with the probability landscape we've been walking through. Small changes, repeated, matter. This perspective also deepens our sense of connection. If lives are interwoven through countless small interactions, then care ripples outward in ways we may never fully see. A kind word offered today may become part of someone else's preferred history tomorrow. You do not control where that ripple ends. You're responsible only for the quality of the gesture. As we approach the end of this session, imagine time not as a strict judge, but as a tapestry. Threads cross and recross. Some knots are tight, some patterns are still forming. Your awareness is one warm thread among many, adding texture without dominating the design. In such a tapestry, ethics is not about perfection. It is about care, about choosing, again and again, to act in ways that reduce harm and increase understanding, even when certainty is unavailable. This may be the most comforting implication of all. You're not required to know the entire pattern. You're required only to tend the thread in your hands. As the story continues, we will gather everything into a final, quiet perspective on time itself, one that leaves room for wonder without asking for belief, and for peace without demanding answers. For now, let this thought rest with you. If the past is softer in meaning, then the present is richer in responsibility, and that responsibility, when carried gently, becomes a form of care. As we arrive at the end of our journey, it helps to pause and look back, not to analyse every step, but to notice the shape that has formed. Like footprints in sand after a long walk, the pattern only becomes visible when you stop moving for a moment. We began with a question that felt almost forbidden. Can yesterday be rewritten? Not with machines or dramatic leaps through time, but quietly, gently, through something as subtle as quantum connection. Along the way, the question changed. We learned that entanglement reveals deep relationships without messages, that delayed choice experiments show how context matters without altering events, that the universe protects causality even while allowing meaning to arrive late, and that probability behaves less like a rigid rulebook and more like a living landscape. What remains is not a power to edit the past, but something softer and perhaps more useful. The past is firm in facts. It does not bend, but its meaning is not frozen. Meaning unfolds as the story continues. What yesterday becomes in your life depends on how today meets it. This is the quiet heart of everything we've explored. Some people describe time as a line, others as a river. Tonight it may be gentler to imagine it as a landscape, a wide terrain where past, present and future are not stacked neatly, but woven together. You move through this landscape one step at a time, carrying memory behind you and intention ahead of you, always standing in a single place called now. This now is not a knife edge dividing before and after. It is more like a clearing, a place where many paths meet. From here, you cannot go back and change where the paths began, but you can choose which one to follow next. Physics does not tell us that consciousness controls reality. It does not promise that awareness can bend events, but it leaves open a quieter mystery. That awareness may be part of how the universe organizes itself. That observation, interaction, and context play roles in how stories become coherent, This is not a doctrine, it is an invitation to wonder. You do not need to believe that the universe listens to your thoughts. It may be enough to notice that your thoughts shape your actions shape your habits, and your habits shape the probabilities you live within. In that sense, the present has real power, not over yesterday, but over how yesterday continues to matter. Some ideas are more comforting when they remain slightly unfinished. The question of consciousness is one of them. Does awareness participate in the unfolding of reality, or is it simply along for the ride? Physics has not answered this, and perhaps it does not need to, at least not tonight. Uncertainty, when held gently, can be kind. It relieves us of the pressure to know everything. It allows us to rest inside questions without demanding solutions. It reminds us that not all mysteries are problems to be solved. Some are spaces to breathe. This is why the idea of an eternal now can feel soothing, not because time truly stops, but because the present is the only place where care, choice, and rest can occur. The past cannot receive your attention directly. The future cannot feel it yet. Only now can, and now, even when it feels small, is enough. If you take anything with you from this journey, let it be this. You're not trapped by a single version of your story. You're living within a field of possibility shaped by countless small interactions. You cannot rewrite yesterday, but you can soften its edges by how you live today. This does not require effort tonight. It does not require planning or fixing. It only requires letting the idea settle, the way glitter settles in a snow globe when it is finally placed back on the shelf. As your thoughts begin to drift, you may notice them wandering back to moments from your own past. If they do, let them come without judgment. They're not asking to be corrected, they're asking to be held differently. Time, like an ocean at night, does not rush. Waves arrive, waves fade, the water remains. And so we've reached the end of this exploration. Whether you're still listening or already floating somewhere between waking and sleep, thank you for sharing this quiet space. If you'd like to wander again through questions that don't demand answers, you're always welcome to return. For now, allow the universe to remain a little mysterious. Allow your past to remain honest, but gentle. And allow yourself to rest, knowing that nothing important needs to be decided tonight. Time can wait.